London, November 1st, 2006. Alexander Litvinenko is sitting at home having dinner with his family. Regular night, nothing dramatic, no warning signs, just a normal evening. A few hours later though, something changes. He starts feeling a sharp pain in his stomach. And this isn't the kind of pain you ignore. It's not bad takeout pain, it feels wrong. Like something is spreading inside him slowly, deliberately, from the inside out. By the next morning, his condition crashes. Nausea, extreme weakness, then sudden collapse. They rush him to the hospital. Doctors run tests, blood work, scans. And here is the strange part. Nothing makes sense. No known illness, no typical poisoning, no medical explanation. But his body, it's shutting down. And it's happening fast. At this point, he realizes something. This isn't random. So he asks to speak to the police, not the doctors, the police. And he tells them one clear sentence. I'm a former Russian intelligence officer. What happened to me was an assassination, and I know who's behind it. They asked him directly, who do you suspect? He answered with no hesitation, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, former intelligence officer. And now the real question becomes unavoidable. Why would a man who once worked inside the system decided to accuse the most powerful man in Russia? Why would he cross that line? The answer doesn't start in London. It starts inside Russian intelligence. And it starts with one moment, when Alexander Litvinenko said no. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe if you haven't yet. And now, grab your favorite drink. Let's jump right into it. The moment he says the name Vladimir Putin, this stops being a medical mystery in a London hospital. It turns into something much bigger. Now it's a state-level accusation, a direct charge against the head of power in Russia. But here's the thing, Alexander didn't just wake up one day and randomly accuse the president of a nuclear superpower. He wasn't an outsider. He wasn't some political activist looking for attention. He came from inside the system. He was one of the men who worked in the shadows, the kind who carried out orders that never make it into official reports. Alexander Litvinenko was born in 1962 in the Russian city of Voronezh. He grew up in an environment where the military and intelligence services were seen as the highest form of service to the country. Honor, duty, loyalty, that was the mindset. After finishing his studies, he joined the Soviet army. From there, he moved into the KGB, an agency often described at the time as a state within a state. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the name changed. The KGB became the SFB. But the mentality, the structure, the methods, those didn't really change. Alexander stayed, same institution, different name. He spent more than 11 years working organized crime cases, tracking mafia networks, investigating sensitive files involving businessmen, politicians, and powerful figures. He wasn't a rebel. He wasn't a dissident. He wasn't even skeptical. He was a committed officer. But over time, he started seeing things he couldn't ignore. Orders that had nothing to do with national security. Political score settling. Protecting corrupt figures instead of prosecuting them. Using the intelligence service as a personal tool for a small group at the top. And then came the turning point. He was asked to take part in an assassination operation targeting a powerful Russian businessman, someone known for openly criticizing corruption inside the state. The man wasn't a terrorist. He wasn't a violent criminal. He wasn't a direct security threat. And for the first time, Alexander stopped. He didn't go public. He didn't run. He simply said he wouldn't carry out the mission. Now, inside an agency like the FSB, refusing an order isn't viewed as a moral stand. It's viewed as a malfunction, a liability, a red flag. Not long long after that, the man behind the orders became clearer, closer, more powerful: Vladimir Putin. In 1988, he was appointed director of the FSB, and from there, his race was fast. Prime Minister, then President of Russia. At that point, Alexander still believed something. He believed the system could fix itself from the inside. So he tried one last path. He met with Putin personally, sat across from him, and handed him a full file. Names of officers and officials involved in corruption and organized crime inside the agency. The file was placed on the table, and quietly, it was closed. No investigation, no response, not even a denial. That's when Alexander understood something. The problem wasn't a few individuals. The problem was the system itself. And in November 1988, he made a dangerous decision. He stepped in front of the media in Moscow. A press conference, standing beside a group of former officers. He publicly exposed what had been happening inside the intelligence service. He spoke about corruption, about illegal orders, about being pressured to carry out a political assassination. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew the price. Within days, he was arrested. The charge: abuse of authority. He spent nearly a year in prison. When he was released, one thing was clear: staying in Russia was no longer an option. In 2000, as Putin officially became president of Russia, Alexander made his move. He decided to escape. Despite being banned from traveling, he used a forged passport, moved through multiple countries, and eventually made it to the United Kingdom, where he applied for political asylum. In London, he lived under an assumed identity for a while. Later, he obtained British citizenship. He worked as an analyst, a writer, a security consultant, and over time, he became one of the most outspoken critics of the Russian regime. And he didn't stop there. He published books, wrote articles, gave media interviews, and he started calling things exactly what he believed they were. The most dangerous move he made: he directly accused Vladimir Putin of being behind the 1999 apartment bombings in Russia. Explosions that shook entire cities, killed hundreds of civilians while they were asleep in their homes, and pushed Russian society into a level of fear it had never experienced before. The official narrative said terrorist attacks. Alexander said the complete opposite. He claimed the bombings were an internal operation, carefully orchestrated, designed to terrify the population, create a manufactured enemy, and drive the public to rally around one man, Vladimir Putin, right before the elections. This wasn't a whisper. It was direct, documented, and coming from a former officer who had worked inside the intelligence system itself. From Moscow's point of view, this wasn't political criticism. It was a declaration of war. From that moment on, Alexander was no longer just a former defector. He became a public threat, a dangerous symbol, someone who needed to be silenced. The Russian system is known for one thing: patience. It doesn't always strike fast. It waits, it watches, and it chooses the timing that hurts the most. Alexander knew that. He understood that after what he had done, his life was on a countdown, and still he continued. He didn't change his statements. He didn't walk anything back. He didn't try to disappear. He kept living his life. On the surface, he was a political refugee, but in reality, he was a man under constant eyes. Every move calculated. And that brings the story back to a place that was supposed to be safe: London.
Кстати, основная проблема, почему Путин не может закончить войну, это потому, что он боится ответственности за те преступления, которые совершили за эти 3 года.
November 1st, 2006. That day, Alexander left his house like it was any other normal day. No panic, no paranoia, just routine. His first meeting was at a small sushi restaurant in central London. Public place, people walking in and out. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. He sat down, he He ate, he talked, then he left. Not once did he feel like something had gone wrong. Hours later, he moved to a second location, the Millennium Hotel, one of the more upscale hotels in London. Two men were waiting for him there. He knew them. They weren't strangers. Former Russian officers, recognized names in intelligence circles. The conversation was calm. On the table, a teapot, clean cups. Tea was poured. Alexander drank a full cup. The meeting ended. They shook hands. Each man walked away. A few hours later, Alexander returned home, and that's when it began. A strange pain in his stomach, a heaviness, nausea, a feeling like something inside him was working slowly. As the hours passed, the pain intensified. His strength faded. His body began to give out. He was taken to the hospital. Doctors were confused. Blood tests, scans, full examinations, and nothing added up. No known poisoning, no virus, no illness that explained what was happening. Just a body collapsing at an illogical speed. After 2 days, his hair started falling out. His skin turned pale. His hands trembled. His nerves began failing him. And that's when Alexander understood. This wasn't an illness. This was an assassination. And it was done in a way he understood very well from his years of service. He immediately asked for the police. When they arrived, he didn't hesitate. In a tired voice, he said, "I'm a former Russian intelligence officer. What happened to me was an assassination." When they asked him how he was so sure, he answered with a chilling calm, "Because this method, I've seen it from the inside." He told them he had been poisoned, and not just with any poison, a slow one, clean, leaves no obvious trace, kills you from within. The kind intelligence services use when they want someone erased without noise. At first, doctors suspected thallium. The symptoms were close: hair loss, nerve damage, gradual collapse. But the lab results, negative, no trace. And that's when the fear deepened. How is a man dying? And there is no evidence explaining why. One of the doctors suggested something more dangerous: radiation. Something unconventional. Something you don't test for in a standard lab. Samples were taken, sent to specialized facilities, and the result came back: polonium-210, an extremely rare radioactive substance produced inside nuclear reactors, not accessible to individuals, only to states. A dose the size of a pinhead is enough to kill a human being, and the worst part, it doesn't show itself immediately. It works slowly, destroying every organ the blood flows through. At that moment, the case exploded. This wasn't poisoning. It was a nuclear assassination in London. And from that point on, the police had little doubt. This wasn't the act of an ordinary individual. A state had entered the game. So they went back to Alexander. "Who do you accuse?" No hesitation. Putin. Because in his words, operations like this don't happen without authorization, and not without it coming from one man. That's when the real investigation began. Not just how Alexander was dying, but how did polonium enter London? Who carried it? And where did the trail begin? So investigators stepped back to that same day, back to the meetings before the pain started. His day had seemed normal, moving around the city, meetings, nothing that stood out. But as I said before, there were two meetings. The first meeting was with an Italian analyst named Mario Scaramella. They met at a well-known sushi restaurant in London. Later, when police tested the restaurant, they found traces of polonium radiation on the table, not the table they had been sitting at. And that's when the first major question mark appeared. If it wasn't Mario, then who? The second meeting, as I said, it was with two Russian men, Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtin. Former officers, familiar faces, all trust. They sat down, started talking, ordered tea. Alexander drank his cup, the whole thing. And later, something hit him. Neither of the two men touched the tea, not once. The meeting ended, each man walked away. A few hours later, the pain began. And now the thread was getting clearer. When police searched the hotel, the shock was complete. Traces of polonium were everywhere. On the table, on the chairs, on the bathroom door, inside the toilet. As if the substance had spilled. Wiped, carried on their hands. Then investigators checked the rooms. Lugovoy and Gavdin had stayed in 2 weeks earlier. Same radiation, same signature. It looked like they had been rehearsing or testing. And then came even a bigger revelation. Police discovered the two men had met Alexander 2 weeks before the poisoning at the same sushi restaurant, at the same table that later tested positive, which meant there had been a first attempt and it failed. The second attempt, the tea. Once that became clear, investigators expanded the search. They tested the airplanes the two men had taken back to Russia. Polonium traces were found on both flights. Now the map was complete. From Moscow to London, to the restaurant, to the hotel, to the cup. A clean assassination, but exposed. Alexander, as he was dying, he was fully aware of what had happened. He asked for his testimony to be recorded, and he delivered a final statement. He said clearly, his murder had been ordered, and the only person with the authority to give such an order was Vladimir Putin. He said it knowing he wouldn't survive. After 23 days of slow, deliberate suffering, his organs failing, his heart stopping more than once. On November 23rd, 2006, his body finally gave out. Alexander was dead, but the story, it was far from over, because what had happened wasn't an ordinary crime, and the victim, a naturalized British citizen, a former intelligence officer who had publicly accused the head of a state. The UK had to respond. First step, attempt to formally question the two men. All the evidence pointed to Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovdin. British intelligence assembled a full case file. Travel routes, radiation trails, surveillance footage, laboratory analysis, everything was ready. A formal team was sent to Moscow, and the atmosphere was tense from the start. British officers moved carefully, every step calculated. They understood something. This wasn't just legal, it was political. They met with the Russian prosecutor general and formally requested permission to question Andrei and Dmitry. The response, shocking. No problem, but they are currently in the hospital. The reason, poisoning. At that point, suspicion turned into certainty, because the only person who could be contaminated with polonium is someone who handled it. The next day, British officers visited them in the hospital. Protective suits, gloves, masks. The questions were direct. London, the hotel, the tea. The answer, total denial. No admission, not even a slip. After 10 minutes, a doctor ended the meetings. And that was it. Russia refused to extradite them, prosecute them, even reopen questioning. The official reason, the Russian constitution prohibits extraditing its citizens. The British team returned to London without suspects, but the case, it grew bigger. Shortly after, Andrei appeared on a press conference, standing confidently, telling the media, Britain is fabricating the story, I'm innocent. Alexander was a double agent.
Не стало ясно, почему за все эти годы британская сторона так и не раскрыла ни одно доказательство по делу Литвиненко. Этих доказательств просто не было. Был набор диких, ничем не подкрепленных предположений. Были политизированные фантазии лондонских детективов.
And a year later, Andrei Lugovoy became a member of the Russian parliament. Full immunity. At that point, this wasn't an assassination anymore. It was a message. Britain responded. Russian diplomats were expelled. Intelligence cooperation was frozen. Political tensions became public. And Russia denied everything. The years passed, and in 2016, after a long public inquiry, Britain released its official conclusion. The assassination of Alexander Litvinenko was a carefully orchestrated operation, and it was likely approved at the highest level. A direct accusation, not media speculation, official. Russia responded the way it always had, total denial. No one was tried, no one was extradited. Dmitry Kovdin, he later died in 2022. Andrei Lugovoy, still alive, protected, a politician. As for Alexander, he was buried in a lead lead-lined coffin because his body was still radioactive. A man who said no. Inside an intelligence system that doesn't accept no. He paid the price slowly. A nuclear assassination in the heart of London. And since that day, his name was stood for one thing. Getting into the game is easier than getting out. And the question that still lingers, was Alexander brave or reckless? And was his assassination the elimination of one man, or a warning to anyone who ever thinks about doing the same? And that was today's story. So what do you think, guys? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe if you haven't yet. See you in the next one.